Bonjour, je m'appelle Hugo Prévost, bienvenue à Entretiens journalistiques. Bienvenue donc à ce 34e épisode de notre série de rencontres avec des journalistes d'ici et d'ailleurs. Aujourd'hui, édition un peu spéciale. Bon, je ne sais pas si vous vous rappelez de l'épisode avec notre invité Tracy Lindemann, qui donc était anglophone. Cette fois-ci, encore une fois, mon invité parle donc dans la langue de Shakespeare et je vais donc... tel un bon Canadien. Je vais donc changer dans l'autre langue officielle. Alors, today we're receiving Robert Hiltz. Hello, Robert.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being there. Robert, you are mostly, I think, a freelance journalist?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you're also a columnist for Loony Politics.
That's correct, every 2 weeks.
And so we're going to talk about both of your jobs, yeah? You also contributed to, I think, Canada Land and also Maisonneuve magazine.
Yes, both of those. I was the interim editor for Canada Land and write there still occasionally, and just wrote my big first long-form piece for Maisonneuve.
And you also did a stint, I think, at Canadian Press a few years ago.
It was Postmedia, actually.
Postmedia,
but back when they ran their own newswire,
that's right. Okay, sorry. And yeah, tell us a bit more about your background, because you went to a bunch of different places.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want me to go way far back, originally I was going to be a mining engineer, but partway through a sort of time with too many spreadsheets, I decided that I'd rather do something else, and I ended up switching to journalism. And I was lucky enough that right out of I did a 2-year college program in Ontario, and our co-op happened to be at the same time as the 2011 election. Mm-hmm. So I kind of lucked out in that I was there for my 4 weeks or whatever it was, and offered to stay on for an extra, I think it was 2 weeks to see out the election. And right after that, I started, getting shifts as an overnight worker, and then that turned into a full-time thing until they laid me off, and then so it goes.
Yeah, I think about being laid off is a harsh reality, but a reality that's known to many journalists today. It's a bit of maybe the darker side of journalism.
Yeah, it can be darker. I mean, it wasn't so dark that I did end up going back to the company after, I guess, a summer sabbatical, a forced summer sabbatical. But yeah, but it happens, and I was, I guess, fortunate to get it out of the way early.
And what was maybe the thing that convinced you to stay in journalism? Because, like you said, you've been laid off. And so, was there a reflection process, thinking process that you told yourself, oh, it's been a bit difficult, maybe, but yeah, it's still fun, it's still interesting, and I'll give it another go?
Yeah, essentially. I had sort of, going back to the mining thing, I had given up on this thing that I thought I wanted to do out of high school, and I went and I found something that I really wanted to do, and it seemed silly to give up on it then. And I mean, not to be, too up my own butt, but I was kind of good at it. So it was only a few months off, and my former boss had moved to a different job within the company and said, hey, if you're interested in moving to Hamilton, come on out and do that. And so I said, sure, let's do it. And in between, in that sort of little sabbatical, I had done a bit of freelance writing for a new startup that no longer exists, Open File. And so I had kind of kept a toe in. It wasn't enough to, be full-time work, but it was something I was still interested in. And, I'd put myself into this position where I wanted to do this, and I gave up on another thing. And to give up on this just because, I was laid off, like half the industry had, gone through it one time or another seemed silly.
I see. And like you said at the beginning of the interview, you work at Postmedia for a bit, and then you went on to freelancing. How do you, besides being laid off, of course, but I mean, how do you go from mainstream media to freelancing?
Well, the easy answer is I was working in Hamilton at this Postmedia job, and my wife my now wife, she was my girlfriend at that point. She got a job here in Montreal, and she said, you're not really enjoying what you're doing there. I was a copy editor at we put together all the different newspapers, and it wasn't like it was sort of a middle tier sort of, you're just a cog in the machine sort of job. And she said, you could really make a go at this, and you should just quit your job, come to Montreal, and give it a try. And I did.
And it seems to have worked.
Yeah, it didn't work at first. It took a while to sort of get set up to know how to pitch stories, how to sort of deal with being rejected, and to sort of just make those connections that are necessary to have your own job essentially. But it's with a bit of patience, it worked out.
And how about Loony Politics? Was there someone from there that approached you, or
it was one of the other columnists had said to me, hey, they're looking for other people. If you're interested, send an email to the editor, who also happens to be named Robert. And I sent him an email. We had a quick phone call, asked me what I wanted to sort of talk about generally, and said, okay, let's give it a try. And I've been doing that for, goodness, 3, maybe 4 years now.
And maybe for the people listening who don't know Loony Politics, could you maybe describe the website? Or
yeah, it's essentially a daily news aggregator where a lot of what they do is they pull together headlines from other websites with a focus on politics. So it's basically a place you can go, you can land on, and if you're interested in Canadian politics, you'll get they do a morning and an afternoon, and I think a small evening edition where they just pull a bunch of headlines of interest. And then they also have a stable of columnists, myself and a bunch of others, that essentially, they think people are interested in reading and sort of add value beyond just, collecting headlines.
Speaking of this columnist job, I wanted to ask you about, because I think we've known each other for I think a year or two now.
Yes.
And there's something I've observed mostly online. There seems to be two Roberts. I don't want to do Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde joke here, but there's this Robert Hiltz, the freelancer, who did, for example, an excellent piece for Maisonneuve magazine on Sudbury. We'll talk about this in a few minutes. But there's also the Robert Hiltz, the internet commentator, maybe the Twitter commentator, the columnist.
The loudmouth.
Maybe the loudmouth, do you see it that way, or do you see it as the two faces of the same job, maybe?
Yes and no. I think the sort of the Twitter persona, if you can call it that, is as a friend of mine said, that I am myself on Twitter. I'm just far more acidic.
You can be harsh sometimes.
I can be harsh. I can be mean. Like the things that it's essentially the way that I would, if I was to yell at my radio for something I didn't like, I heard on the news or whatever. This is just basically a sort of shortened text expression of my sort of my inner id, I guess.
Well, is there a risk? Because when you're in journalism, especially if you're in mainstream media, there's always a set of rules that you have to follow, especially online, especially on social media. I work at CBC, and we have this long list of rules that you have to stay objective, that you have to stay neutral. But besides that, you don't work in mainstream media. Maybe I think you don't feel contrived by this set of rules that maybe don't apply to you because, as I said, you're a freelancer. But is there still a risk that future clients will see that and tell themselves, well, he's a bit harsh and he maybe speaks too much, maybe speaks his mind too much, and I won't hire him because he may maybe later badmouth our publication or something like that?
Right. I think to an extent there is a risk, and it's kind of a conscious choice I've made that, and I don't think this is anything that's like heroic or anything like that, but I just made the choice that, this is sort of, I think, this is the voice I want to have. This is sort of what I think. It's, a little harsher and meaner than I might put it in conversation here. Or really
it's Twitter
else.
after all. You have to punch a little bit to be noticed.
Exactly, and so it's kind of a choice I've made that, like, okay, well, this is sort of the voice I want to project on Twitter, and it's what I'm going to do, and there may be consequences from that, like, if I walked into CBC or CTV or whatever, and for whatever reason was given a job, my Twitter would probably change quite a bit.
Mine did.
If I could even get in the door at this point, who knows?
Yeah.
But it's the sort of career that I've set out on and that I'm, having and want to have essentially is one where my Twitter this is what it is. Mm-hmm. If it's a problem, then maybe, we're not well suited to work together. But at the same time, I've got this body of work that I think, shows that I'm more than just the loudmouth. Like it's a part of me, and like it's something that exists, but it's not sort of the whole picture.
Yeah. But still, when you Google your name, the first result will be your Twitter account.
I think it is. It's that, or there's an archbishop somewhere in Canada.
But did anyone ever told you, well, Robert, it's a bit too much? Have you ever had any comment from a friend or a boss, or who told you that maybe you should turn it down a little bit?
I think an old boss at one point had said, maybe it's a bit too much, but if it's what you want to do, and I kind of, I understand that, and occasionally I think of. Actually, when I think of if I want to get off Twitter, this is never the reason why. It's always like it's just breaking my brain into little pieces. But I think at the point of my career and what I'm doing, it's not affecting any of the things I want to do. Mm-hmm. So it's not something I'm really looking at making big changes to.
And do you have the impression when you see your, not necessarily colleagues, but when you see other journalists staying right between the lines, do you feel that it's a facade because everybody has opinions? I understand, I think we both understand the need to stay mostly objective, mostly neutral, because you represent your employer online. But do you feel that we're putting our I don't have the right word in English, but we're putting ourselves in a box voluntarily instead of being forced to be?
I think in some ways, yes. I think in some ways people sort of, because of the demands of the job and the way, especially if you're doing any political journalism, politicians will play off that sort of thing and in a way weaponize it. But we all do have biases and opinions and thoughts, and even when people are not sort of explicitly doing what I'm doing, which is kind of just being a dick. Can we say dick on the podcast?
I think we can.
But even if they're not consciously doing that, there are biases that show up in different ways in what they talk about, in sort of the wry, read between the lines jokes they do. There's always a bit of that, and I think there's a value in sort of just being more honest with where you're coming from. I think I'm kind of that sort of Gawker mentality, which is why I kind of fit well in with Canada Land, in that sort of sense of, putting yourself in that box it's a fake box. It's a box that it's an illusion. It's a game we're all playing sort of off each other to make it seem like we are all, the ideal Walter Cronkite or whoever, when in reality we aren't.
I want to take you back to freelance journalism. Sorry. Is there a routine that you use to prepare for an article, for example? Is there a bunch of steps, a number of steps that you have to take every time to publish an article at the end?
That depends on what it is. For example, the Maisonneuve piece we've kind of sort of mentioned a couple times. That started out, a germ of an idea started out because I'd written another piece for it's CIM magazine. It's more of an industry focused. It's the Canadian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy. I think there's also oil and gas in there, but they've got a longer name that isn't in the whole acronym. Anyways, I'd written a story about this smelter, just the upgrade parts in Sudbury, and sort of they just completed this $1 billion project where they're reducing sulfur dioxide emissions and a whole bunch of other things. And I was talking to a friend of mine who is the editor at Maisonneuve. I don't think she was the editor-in-chief then, but Selena Ross. And something I had said she thought was interesting about that. And, hey, do you think you could expand on that little idea? And then, so from there, it kind of snowballed. I kind of, after a conversation I wrote in my notebook here, pages and pages of just like thoughts and kind of like a shell, and then I put that into a pitch, and then did a bunch of reporting, interviews, wrote a draft, and then kind of back and forth and so on. But if it's sometimes I'll just get a commission for a piece where it's like, hey, we've got this document, or this news has happened today, can you go do it? And then sure, I'll make the 3 phone calls that are necessary. Because I started working on a wire service, so I can write very quickly if I need to, and that's a skill not everyone sort of comes with. And when you start doing it that way, it's a totally different process. Like I won't write notes in my notebook first. I'll just kind of get into it.
And do you think you keep on freelancing for maybe another few years, or do you think that there's a moment where you tell yourself, okay, maybe I'll try doing mainstream media again?
I think if the right job came around, I would absolutely jump back into the mainstream media. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I'd want to be a sort of daily grinding reporter again. Just because, I mean, part of the way freelancing works is you kind of get to follow around what you want to do, and sort of some of the day-to-day stuff doesn't matter. Like I write a politics column every 2 weeks, so I have to understand what's going on, but I don't have to sort of report out each sort of iteration of what happens every day. Whereas, if I went into just a daily job, I'd have to do that again. And, I don't want to say I kind of moved on from it, but I don't know that interests me anymore.
I mean, it can be harsh going back to a 9 to 5 schedule, or having to pack a lunch, or maybe
right. My office is 12 or 13 steps from my bed, kind of thing.
Yeah, you can stay in your PJs and work.
I usually don't, because I found early on that, like, I'd work from the couch or the kitchen table, and I wouldn't really get dressed, and I found that actually very difficult to do work because you never really get in the sort of work mode or whatever it is. And it's also just in some ways kind of a sad way to live. Plus I also have a dog and she needs to be walked in the morning, and I don't like walking around the neighborhood in, my pajamas or whatever. So it kind of...
Yeah, you're not there yet. Maybe in a few years.
We'll see, maybe I get, really successful, or just really, give up. And I guess either way, it kind of works either way.
Exactly. Would you recommend to a new journalist coming out of school, would you recommend going directly into freelancing? Maybe it's even if it's a bit harder to, like you said before, have the right contacts, know the right persons, and have maybe be able to successfully pitch a topic, or instead maybe you tell them, well, do a few years in the mainstream media, the radio station, TV station, or daily paper, and then move on to when you have the experience and the knowledge, maybe then move on to freelancing?
I don't think it would be possible for me to be able to do what I do now if I hadn't have done those other things first. If I hadn't have, had to write 2 or 3 stories a day for a wire service, I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I hadn't done 2.5 years as a copy editor on a national desk. Like I just, I think there are some people that can do it. People that have well-developed voices and skills and so on. But I think for most people, it's a really, really big leap because you don't really know anyone and you haven't sort of been through the kind of meat grinder of learning all the skills sort of on the job. And it's also tough because even though I only started in 2011, like in those 8 years or whatever, there are a fraction of the jobs available that were even available when the place where I started doesn't exist anymore. They don't have 15 reporters sitting in Ottawa doing news stories for Post Media. They have, they have a bureau of 4 or 5 people. So it's hard for me to say that knowing how things have changed, but it's also, I also think it's quite difficult to go into this without being able to have done it and to sort of, have screwed up. And that's a big thing is like, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And making mistakes as part of an institution is a lot easier to recover from because you have people that are going to catch those mistakes, people that are going to be able to kind of help keep your credibility than if you make those mistakes as a freelancer. And I think we've seen this over the years with a number of different sort of incidents where publications won't necessarily stand by a freelancer in the way they would stand by someone on staff because it's just the easy way out.
Maybe one last question. We talked about your Twitter persona. Would you like to comment a bit on the current federal election?
I mean, isn't enough that I have to write about it every 2 weeks? No, I'm being a bit glib, but I think it's one of the most wretched things I've ever sort of had to watch.
I think it's mostly the opinion of, I don't want to say more seasoned commentators, but maybe other columnists say that there's not much happening.
It's
on a journalistic standpoint.
Everything is happening on sort of a very facile kind of surface level. It's all, it's a lot of image, optics kind of thing. And thrown into that, it turns out that, the Prime Minister was walking around in blackface for many years on many different occasions and just we didn't know or was never reported or whatever. But it hasn't been an election of... Everyone's just trying to take everyone else out by the knees.
Yeah.
And it's not about things, it's just about who's worse. It's a very kind of, I don't want to say lowbrow, but there's no like it's just junk. It's junk. It's garbage. I really don't like where it's gone as just kind of like just a citizen of the country. Like I don't know what I'm supposed to take out of this. But the first debate's tonight. Who knows? Things may turn around.
Yeah, that's true. The first debate is tonight on TVA. Do you think that it was better before, or
I don't know if it was better before?
Something like make elections great again, or I don't know.
See, here's the thing. I don't know if it was better before, but I think it's worse now.
I see. Well, Robert Hiltz, freelance journalist and columnist for Looney Politics, thank you very much for being here.
It was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me, and apologies to your listeners for my lack of French.
Oh no, I'm sure that's one day you'll learn, you'll be assimilated like everyone else. Pour ceux qui nous écoutent, évidemment, merci d'avoir été là également. Vous pouvez bien sûr retrouver tous nos épisodes sur pieuf.ca, sur SoundCloud et sur iTunes. À bientôt!